thank you everybody for coming. We're really glad to see you. Today we have Nucleon, or Arlo as we know him. He's a content creator at ImageAlign Software. Does a lot of the stuff you use in FL Studio. Today he's looking at advanced automation. So take it away, Arlo.
Hi everyone, I'm going to show you some automation techniques and include internal controllers. I'll start off basic and build up from there. Here I'm going to start with a baseline and do some typical filter cutoff automation. I will right click the parameter and use Create Automation Clip. So that's pretty standard, but what I'm going to do is create some rhythmical patterns in the clip. So here I'm creating some pulses. That sounds pretty cool, but as you can see, the peaks in the automation are all the same. So to add variation, I'm going to use a technique. If you double click the clip, it brings up its channel settings. And here you will notice there's minimum and maximum settings for that clip. These will change the range that that clip is automating. So here, for example, during playback, this means you can vary the range the clip is automating during your song. This means you can have one rhythmical pattern repeating, yet fade it in and out and change the amounts to add variation in your song. So here I'm going to automate the maximum parameter of the previous clip. So if I start off low, I can fade it in and fade it out again and so on. Some nice tips at this stage is, for instance, double-clicking the clip, and from this menu here, you have various articulator settings. So here I can use scale levels and change all points at the same time, offset them, change their tension and so on. Okay, so let's hear that in the context of a bit of a loop. Let's focus on another element here, the sustained chords. I'll open the channel playing them, set the window to detach so it stays in front, and again I'm going to do some filter automation. Let's create a bit of a build-up. Okay, so that's interesting, but let's try and make that more complicated. I could go through and create a new automation clip for different parameters to vary the sound, but I'm going to simplify things by linking the one clip to different parameters. The moment it's linked to cutoff, I'm going to link it to LFO speed. If I right-click the parameter and use Link to Controller, and look in the Internal Controllers menu, you'll see that the previous clip I created is actually an internal controller I can link to. If I select it and make sure Remove Conflict is off, so it doesn't wipe the previous link, I can link the one automation clip to both parameters. And so as this one increases, this one will increase too. But I don't really want this one to follow the exact same path as the previous parameter. So if I go back to the link, I can go to the mapping formula section. If I click the menu, you get various presets to change the way the parameter is automated. For example, say inverted. And as the first parameter goes up, the second one goes down. But I actually want it to start from the middle. So for that, I'll do some basic math. And now you'll go from the center downwards as this one goes up. Let's try that with a third parameter. So you can create some interesting links, and it's all simplified by only using one clip in the playlist at a time. Let's put that all together. Okay, so that's formula mapping and automation clip uses. Next project, I'm going to move on to my first internal controller plugin. And this one will be the keyboard controller. And I have a simple loop. To demonstrate, I'm going to apply it to some parameters on a pad sound. So here's the normal pad sound. I'm going to add a filter plugin. I'm going to use Fruity Love Filter and set it to its default preset. And just pick the vanilla low pass. Sure it's active. So if I pick the keyboard controller from the plugin database, I can drag it to the channel rack. And it appears like this. Each note in the keyboard controller can send a parameter value to a linked control. So here, for instance, I'm going to right-click the cutoff knob on the filter, link to controller, and in the internal controllers menu, I see keyboard controller, note, and velocity. I'm going to link it to note. Now, as each note on the keyboard controller is played, it changes the value of the cutoff knob. You can manually pick a note and change its value, like this, if needed. Or, from the top part of the keyboard, select a range. I'm going to select 3 octaves and then use auto map. Now start from 0 to the top here. You can use different minimum and maximum values by using interpolate. Okay, so how does this sound? I've got an empty pattern. It's already placed in the playlist. Repeating. So if I add notes in the piano roll of the keyboard controller channel, it will change the parameter values of the filter. This allows for some interesting sequenced patterns, for instance. And I can edit the notes as I would any other set of notes.
I can take this one step further and add another parameter. If I right-click Filter Resonance and go Link to Controller, then I go back to the Internal Controllers menu and this time link it to Velocity and accept. Now the velocity of each note will be linked to the resonance, so I can use that to add further variation. I can pick certain notes and make them have a higher resonance on the filter. So in the context of the loop. Okay, so that's cool. I'm going to use one more keyboard controller. If I load that back into the channel rack. And in the pad sound, I'm going to load an effect plugin with the same filter plugin. But this time, I'm going to set it to its volume and panning preset.
This one I'm going to map to just a single note. And enable the note off value, which I'm going to set at 0. So when the note is active, the value is maximum, and when the note is released, it will go to 0. So here, if I link it to the volume of the plugin, acts as a gate. And I can create a specific gating pattern in the piano roll. I can use the smoothing to smooth out the changes, so if I increase the release, it will make the gating less abrupt. Or maybe even some attack. I can also apply that to the filter if I link them. To slide the filter in. The nice part about using keyboard controller is the automation is held in a normal pattern clip. You can make unique variations as you would any other notes in the piano roll. And also a nice feature is it responds to global swing.
Okay, so that was some keyboard controller usage. And this one I'm going to show uses of the peak controller.
It loads as an effect. I'm going to load it to this synth track. It mutes the output by default, so you unmute it with this button here. It has two sections. The peak section is an envelope follower, and the LFO section syncs to song time. I'll solo the sound and play through. You see the input peaks turned into an internal controller. I'm going to use the decay parameter to smooth the changes. I'm going to link this to the feedback filter of the delay effect that's on the same mixer track. Notice the 3 separate outputs. I'm going to choose peak. I'm going to also combine that with the LFO section. If I turn its volume up, you see the shape on the graph. You can choose other shapes from the menu here, for instance triangle or even random. Right-click the speed knob to pick some tempo synced values, or check the FL Studio hint bar as you turn a knob to see the value in steps. Hold Control for fine adjustments. I'm going to link this to the pan parameter of the same delay. Notice I choose the LFO output instead of peak. So now I have an unusual filtering and panning delay that I didn't have before. In the context of the project, I'm going to use another instance on a different track this time. I'll actually load it to the drum track. This is a separate set of drums that I'm going to actually keep muted with this button. You see the peaks? I'll increase the volume of those and the bass level. I'm going to go and load another love filter onto a pad sound. I'll choose the volume and panning preset again and link the peak output to the volume. Notice how the volume is changing, corresponding to this other drum track here. So now it's actually affecting the volume of the pad sound.
Okay, so that was Fruity peak controller usage. I'm going to move on now to Fruity envelope controller. First usage of envelope controller I'm going to use for sidechain effects. Okay, so I have this project running.
It's in the generator section, similar to Fruity keyboard controller, but it has a fully editable envelope and 8 separate outputs. Here's what the project sounds like at the moment. I already have a volume preset on the strings, And I'm going to link the output of through the envelope controller to the volume parameter. Notice the 8 separate outputs of the one instance of through the envelope controller. I'm going to go into the piano roll of the envelope controller to trigger it. Notice each time a note plays, the envelope on the controller plays through also. You have your usual editing abilities. I enabled tempo synced mode, so I see beats and steps. I'm going to sync it to each beat, for instance. Here we already have something going that's similar to a sidechain. I'm going to delete the other points to focus on the main section. I'm going to make it go to the half beat like this. If I change it to unipolar mode, then I can adjust the bass of the level the sidechain goes down to. Effectively becoming your sidechain amount. I also have a fairly sustained sounding bass in this track. So I'm going to apply the same thing to that. I have another volume preset on its track. So if I copy the first envelope with this menu here, copy state, and paste it to the second articulator, then I will link that articulator to the volume of the bass. Now you can see both are being sidechained, and because I have two separate articulators, I can adjust the amount for the bass differently to the amount for the strings. Probably want a little less for the bass. This method is particularly handy when you have a more complicated kick drum, for instance. You can use the pattern in the piano roll rather than just 4/4.
Okay, so that was sidechain usage with envelope controller, but I'm going to expand on that and bring in patcher into this project. Here's the strings channel. If I go to the generator section and pick patcher from there and drag it on top of the string channel, it will patcherize it, so it will appear inside patcher but play as normal. So in this case, I'm going to load inside it another envelope controller. And it appears as a module. If I right-click this module, I go to its outputs. I use activate all, so they're all enabled. And you see their outputs as a node on its module here. Now I'm going to load another filter from the effects section. And I'll load it to the signal path coming out of the strings. If I double-click that to open it, I'm just going to pick the default preset and a band stop filter. Now I want to create some interesting effects with that. So if I right-click the cutoff of the band stop filter and use activate in patcher, it appears as a nodule you can link a parameter to. So here I'm going to link the articulator 1 output of envelope controller to the cutoff parameter of the filter here. Now each time a note is triggered, it will change the cutoff value depending on this envelope here. So you can use it to create interesting envelope effects on any parameter within Patcher. I'm going to use one more. If I go to its second parameter, I'm going to enable its envelope from here. But I'm going to actually set this envelope flat. So it doesn't really do anything, but from this menu below the controls, I'm going to pick its LFO output and delete the breakpoints and set the first breakpoint maximum so you have a basic LFO, and enable it from this button here. Now the second articulator of envelope controller will output an LFO. I'm going to go to the love filter and right-click its pan parameter here and activate, and another node appears on its module. I'm going to link this to the second output of envelope controller. Now, each time the note plays, the LFO will be sent to the pan of the filter. I can change the LFO range here. The nice thing about Patcher is all this complex setup can be saved as one preset. You can load that in any other project, or it's a nice way of combining everything into something simple that you can use elsewhere without having to do all your links and envelopes from scratch again. Okay, so that all sounds like this together. I'm going to load another project and show another usage.
Do you think you're crazy enough to think that you could fix her with your love?
On the vocal track, I have 8 different special effects.
Do you think you're crazy enough?
If I load a Fruity Envelope controller again, this time I'm going to choose its note gate preset and copy the articulator to all other articulators. Now I have 8 gates. I'll set them all to unipolar mode. You can save this as a preset, of course. Now I'm going to link all 8 articulators to the effect mix knob of each of the 8 effects. A quicker way to do this is to enable multi-link at the top of FL Studio, tweak all 8 knobs, then right-click multi-link and choose Link to Controllers. Then you can cycle through without as much hassle. And finally, I'm going to limit the key range on all 8 articulators to 1 note if I use the top of the keyboard mapping here. So articulator 1 is a C, 2 C sharp, and so on. Okay, so now if I have an empty pattern in the project, along with the vocal, I'll go to the piano roll of the envelope controller, and notes in this piano roll will trigger each of the various effects.
Do you think you're crazy enough? You can fix her with your love. Do you think you're crazy enough to think that you could fix her with your love? Think you're crazy enough to think that you could fix her with your love? Think you're crazy enough that you could fix her with your love? Think you're crazy enough to think that you could fix with your love? Think you're crazy enough?
Okay, so that's pretty cool, and I can go one step further with that. If I go to the menu here for each articulator of various options, here I'm going to use a velocity mapping. I'll just bring the first breakpoint down on all of them. Now, the velocity of the notes in the piano roll of the envelope controller will have a different overall amount. So in this case, we'll use a different mix of each effect.
Think you're crazy enough to think that you could fix her with your love?
So for example, I could just pick one effect and have it slowly coming in.
Do you think you're crazy? Do you think you're crazy?
Thank you again for coming, everybody, and thanks again, Arlo.